So welcome to World Religions. I was just telling my class, the way I like to teach this class is first person. And so what I'm going to be doing is trying to get you to put on a different pair of goggles. Each one will represent a different religion in the world, and to see if I can get you to look at the world through those lenses. So if you're not used to this teaching style, it might be a little disconcerting, but I find it's the most effective way. Instead of me teaching about other religions from, say, like a Christian perspective, like a Christian view of animism, I'm going to try to teach you an animistic view of animism to the best of my ability. And after I do that, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to critique it because I am a Christian, from a Christian perspective, and it is a comparative religion class. So in a lot of these religions, you'll just see they'll start seeming so far apart, but then as I begin to talk about them and explain them, you'll see they get closer and closer, but they don't really touch. And that's the process I'm going to do. Also, I'm going to be using the Bible as like a grid or a strainer. And so after I've taught each religion in all its own glory and its own appeal, we're going to push it through the grid of Scripture and see if anything comes out the other side. With some of them, much will come through. With others, very little will come through at all. And so the first one out the chute is animism. And animism is perhaps the oldest of the world religions, especially, and I'm making this statement based on anthropology and history, because when we look at the earliest cultures, they all tend to have some sort of animistic flavor to them. And animism, quite simply put, is virtually everything is alive, okay, or has a spirit. And the reason I'm qualifying that with virtually is because some things are dead. And things are dead when the spirit has departed. So, for example, most people in the West, including Christians, would acknowledge things like plants, animals, people are alive. But they'd be really hard put if you ask them about things they call inanimate objects. See, for the animists, there are no inanimate objects except for dead things. And they're dead because the spirit they once had is no longer with them. So, for example, not only am I a living being and have a spirit, but I went and retrieved my favorite coffee mug from my office today. This is number one. I've had him for longer than any of you, at least here with me today, have been alive. And number one is very much alive. He has his own soul, his own spirit, personality, temperament, all of those sorts of things. Now, I've had other favorite mugs in the past that have all died horrible deaths, but number one's getting old, but he's still hanging with me. So this is number one. You'll see him here with me for many of my lectures. He's a great prop, and I can teach a lot of philosophy using number one. In addition to things like coffee mugs, it might be someone's bow and arrow, or a sword, or a tea set, or a table, chairs. It doesn't matter. And these things have souls or spirits in and of themselves. Now, there's another way objects can get spirits as well. They can actually be put into an object or added to the existing spirit in the object by, say, like a medicine man, a shaman, or a sorcerer. And later on, when we get to the East, we'll see a lot of syncretism going on. And syncretism means taking two divergent things and bringing them in sync or harmony together. And what you're going to see happens with animism is a lot of the other religions we're going to talk about in this class have come into animistic cultures, and they put a veneer of Buddhism, Hinduism, Catholicism, evangelical Christianity, Islam, over the top of this core belief of everything is alive and has a spirit. Now, for example, this is some juju. And this little carved head, I believe this one comes from Papua New Guinea. So this isn't just some nice little figurine that someone's carrying around or something like that. A shaman or witch doctor can put power into this like a spell or a blessing, and it can be used as a ward against evil. And so people would go to witch doctors, they would buy these sorts of amulets and charms, and they would wear them as protections. Now, just off the top of your head, what's the problem with that type of protection? Anybody?
I mean, what if like another shaman like decides to put like another curse on you? Do they like cancel out?
Well, sure, you could have cancel outs, but what happens if I'm trolling through the woods with this and next thing I know I lose it? Well, there goes my protection, right? And so that's my personal biggest problem with like charms and amulets and things like of that nature is if you don't have them with you, you lose the protection they offered. And so it's like your security, like a little kid's security blanket, but now they're wearing them on their wrist or around their neck, or they have them tattooed into their bodies. There's lots of different charms and spells you can use. And what's interesting to me is some of these ancient animistic, like sorcery, witchcraft items have come down into our modern culture, even in the form of just like costume jewelry. I mean, I don't know if it's trending right now, but a couple years ago, I noticed a lot of the young women at the college were wearing charm bracelets again. That was kind of something my mom did when she was a little girl. And so say you got a new pet, you would get a charm in the shape of that pet. Or your family moved into a new home, you'd get a little house charm to hang from your bracelet. Or maybe you got married, you'd get a little charm to symbolize your marriage. Or you got a new car, you'd have a little car charm. And so you end up having all these charms, and in the past, each one of these would have been blessed by a shaman or a medicine man. But as Christianity came into these animistic cultures and put a veneer over the top, it was easy to convert it, right? And now you just go to the priest, and the priest blesses your pet or your home or your marriage. But people would keep wearing these charm bracelets. I asked many Christians that I see wearing crosses or crucifix. I asked them, why do you wear that? And some say, oh, I want to be reminded of my Lord and his sacrifice. Great, that's wonderful. But others tell me, oh, I wear it for protection. If you are wearing a cross or crucifix for protection, you are really practicing a type of witchcraft or animism. You are using that like a charm or an amulet. An amulet is like a really buff charm. The buffest one I ever read about, I was also a history major, was Charlemagne the Great had a crystal amulet. It was about this big, like a brooch, but inside of it were two splinters of supposedly the true cross. And he believed as long as he was wearing that, he would be safe from harm or poison, assassination, those sorts of things. But once again, that is like a Christian veneer over, you're using Christian icons or elements, but you're using them in a very witchcraft or animistic sort of way. All right. I brought a few examples. This is a stone from the deep, deep desert. And this was the hardest part for me as a Westerner to wrap my mind around. I got the idea that plants and animals are alive. I mean, and we would, even a naturalist materialist, someone who doesn't believe in the supernatural, would at least acknowledge organic things are living. My problem was, what about things in the West that we consider unorganic or inanimate, like this stone? But see, for the animist, even this stone has a spirit and is alive. And you have to remember, if we all came from stardust, this stone at one time might have been a plant. It might have been an animal. It might have even been a human being. But as the elements, the spirit went back into the spirit realm, the physical part of the stone returns to the earth. But see, in this stone is still a being, a living being that's carrying on and going through these cycles and processes of life. It's simply, I don't know if I have that kind of spiritual sensitivity to understand the spirit in this stone. Years ago, I got to go to a Polynesian dance festival where they had people from Hawaii, Tahiti, the South Pacific, and they actually had one of the big kahunas from Hawaii come and do a demonstration. And a kahuna, it's a holy man or shaman, and in the Hawaiian tradition, and all this man did was, there was like this rice paper mat laid out, and he had this river stone, a nice beautiful round river stone that had been split in half. And for about 5 minutes he was knelt on the stage, and he just kept doing this over the top of the stone. And you could tell the audience was getting uncomfortable because there was all this dancing and singing before, and here you have like this 80-year-old Hawaiian guy just doing this over a stone for like 5 minutes. And then he stood up, and one of his big Samoan assistants came out, and he was holding a cross-section of a banana tree, and it was about like this, and this big, like 300-plus Samoan guy's holding this, and this 80-year-old man took his bare hands and started to hit and strike at this, and he ripped it to shreds. And this big Samoan's just being tossed around like a rag doll as this 80-year-old Hawaiian man is using his hands basically like an axe. And then he bowed and walked off the stage. And I was tripping. And so one of my friends was a dancer, so I was able to get invited to the after party. And he was there, and I went up and talked to him, and I said, "Did you take the spirit out of that rock?" And his eyes got big, and he said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Well, I didn't see it, but that's the only explanation I could think of for what I just saw." And he said, "That's exactly what I did." He said, "I felt really bad because in doing that, I killed the rock, basically, because he took the spirit of the rock into himself. And then he used that energy from the stone to tear apart that banana cross-section." And I was just thinking, wow. He said, "I just wanted the people in the West to realize there were other ways to use energy." See, he was trying to speak to me like a Western materialist, and I was trying to speak to him like an animist. So I was using words like spirit, but he was using words like energy when he would talk to me. And I thought that was really interesting. And he said, "I just wanted people in the West to understand there are different ways of doing similar things." Like, for example, in the West, we would have taken that stone, maybe shaped it into an axe head, and then used that energy to cut down the banana tree. But he was showing how you could do it directly without turning it into a tool, but you could take that energy directly into yourself. And I just thought that was incredibly fascinating. And then we had a big talk about fleas and sharks and how hard it was to communicate with them not to bite us, and other animals. And I just had a wonderful time. And I think I'm pretty spiritually sensitive, but I was not picking up any sense of like demonic activity or anything like that. It was just a different approach in the world is how I was seeing it at that time. And I thought that was a really excellent experience. Okay, what else did I want to show you? Oh, here's another example of what I would call juju. And so we'll find lots of sympathetic magic in the animistic worldview. And so these are owl talons. And so the idea behind this is, if I'm wearing something with these owl talons on it, I'm going to take on the strength and the properties of an owl. So maybe it will improve my night vision. Maybe I'll become a better hunter, at least for rodents and small game. But that is this idea. You'll see people wearing like lion or jaguar teeth or claws. And the idea behind that is I'm incorporating the spirit of that animal, that powerful predator, into my life. And think about it. We talk about you are what you eat. Well, for the animists, this takes on even spiritual elements. So, if you want to be beautiful and graceful and sleek, well, then you should eat animals like gazelles or antelopes, things that possess these qualities. But guess what's going to happen if you eat a lot of pork belly? You're going to end up looking like this, right? Because I'm actually taking in the qualities of that pig or that swine that I consume. Here's where it gets really interesting to me when we think about the dead, because remember, the dead, it doesn't mean they cease to exist, it simply means they are separated from their body. So, in a lot of animistic cultures, the dead are very, very important. And you'll see these reflected in these cultures because when you have an ancestor whose physical body dies, you can preserve the soul or spirit of that ancestor in the group. Guess how? Consuming the dead. And so a lot of cannibalism we see in the world or tribal cultures, it's not for nutrition or because they're hungry. It's religious and it's ritual, and it's to incorporate the dead back into the group because you don't want to lose them to some other outside force. Or it could be you want the qualities or virtues of that person. So if you want strength and courage and power, well, you're going to want to sacrifice, kill, and eat a very brave, courageous, powerful person. And then those attributes will come to you. If you want youth, beauty, elegance, well, you're going to want to sacrifice someone that is young, beautiful, and elegant and consume that flesh and incorporate those virtues into yourself. And this is part of what was going on in Mesoamerica with the Maya, the Inca, the Aztecs. And it was actually a great honor to be sacrificed to the gods. In fact, often there would be competition. You've probably seen the game the Aztecs played. It's kind of like a combo of soccer and basketball, where there's a hoop on the side of the court and you're trying to use your hips or your feet to put the ball through the hoop. Well, the winning team, the prize is you get to be sacrificed to the gods. That's your reward. And so it's just a completely different mentality as we have. We would think, oh, the losing team gets sacrificed, right? By Western cultural standards. But by their culture, it was a great honor because you were creating a bridge. You were supplicating the gods, and then the people would get the virtue of eating your flesh, so you would be incorporated back into the tribe, into the community. It also helps understand a lot, too, if you understand creation stories and mythologies. So for example, the Aztecian god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, he came upon the Aztec people after they had been destroyed, and they were nothing but bones. All the flesh and life had been removed from them. It reminds me so much of in Ezekiel, where it talks about the valley of dry bones, where God comes upon Israel that is nothing but dead and bones and reanimates them and gives them life, in that case by his own spirit. In the Aztecian account, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, gave life to the Aztec people by giving them his own blood. And by pouring out his blood, he animated and gave life to the Aztec people. So, in honor of that god, they would sacrifice and give blood back to him. And so, I'm not trying to necessarily justify human sacrifice. I just want you to understand there's a reason for it, and it goes back to their creation accounts and how they came to be as a people. And it's all integrated. Now imagine you're an Aztecian person when the Spanish conquistadors and the priests come to Mexico. And they're explaining to you the Christian religion, and they get to Mass. And in Mass, they are actually eating the flesh and drinking the blood of Christ, of their God. Can you imagine what that would have meant to an animistic Aztecian mindset? Because what does that mean? It means by consuming the flesh and blood of the God, you take on those qualities or attributes of that God into yourself. And that would have been a very positive thing, as you could imagine. Now, I am going to interject a little bit from a Christian perspective here for a moment. Even though that is the animistic view of what's happening at communion, in the Christian view, I believe it's actually the inverse. By taking communion, celebrating the death of Christ, we are eating his flesh, drinking his blood, but it's not that we're taking on the attributes or power of the God or the Son of God, Jesus, but rather it is us who is being converted and transformed into the image of the Son. It is us who is being converted and changed. It's not like we're just beefing up like, oh, I'm going to eat a little beautiful maiden here. I'm going to chomp on the thigh of a warrior here. I'm going to eat the brains of an intellectual over there to try to get all these quality traits. And I'm going to have some of the flesh and blood of a God here to add to me and my virtue. No. In Christianity, it's the opposite. It's like the God is the one taking over who we are, and it is us who is diminishing. It's not us who is becoming greater and bigger and more perfect. It is rather the God has come upon us, and through this communion, it's called hermetic cannibalism. You can imagine why they never asked me to do communion at my church, but because this is the kind of stuff I want to talk about. I just think it's so incredibly profound, and it goes back to these primal aspects of humankind. Okay, any more comments or questions on this part? All right, I want to keep going just a little bit more. This guy here is called Molly Mongo, and Molly Mongo was the first man, one of my former students who was a missionary to Papua New Guinea, brought this back for me. And you can see on top here we have a toucan and a crocodile. And so the first man came from a toucan and a crocodile, at least in their tradition. And it's so interesting. These students I had were raised in Papua New Guinea. They were missionary kids, and then they came to our school and then went back to a different tribe and shared the gospel with them. But part of their system, how they would do this, first you would have to learn the language, the cultures, the customs of that tribe. In fact, you would have to be adopted by that tribe for them to even listen to you. And so my friend was actually married when he went there, and so he had to be adopted by one clan and his wife by another, because you had to marry outside of your clan. Like exogamous marriages. You couldn't marry within the same clan group. So his wife was, say, I don't remember the names exactly, but say he was in the crocodile clan and she was in the toucan clan. And then they had their patrons, their tribal parents, etc. And they wanted to build a home when they moved into the tribe. So they'd been adopted, they'd been given tribal names into the clans. Now they want to build a home. But in order to build a home, a tree is going to have to be cut down. And so they had this huge ritual supplicating the spirit of the tree and asking its permission if it would give its life so that they could have shelter. It was cut down in a very sacred, respectful way. All the parts of the tree were used, etc., etc. And I asked my friend, I'm like, when you were my student, you were always getting on my case about animism, and now you go back into Papua New Guinea and you're doing one of the most animistic things possible. You're actually supplicating a tree before you cut it down. And he said, easy, Blackburn. He's like, there's a reason for that. He says, if we would have made a big stink right then and there, they wouldn't have even listened to us when we wanted to share the gospel or the Bible. And I said, okay, I'm certainly not going to judge you. I'm not there with you, but I want to hear the rest of the story. And so It turns out when they eventually did share the gospel with the tribe members called them on it, which I thought was so fascinating. They said, "Here you are, Christians, but you were there at the tree supplication ceremony." And my missionary friend said, "We didn't supplicate the tree. That was you all. We were just being polite. Because we believe that God made all things, including the trees, including us, including the animals, and that's who we pray to, and that's who we look to for our strength, protection, support. We're not looking for tree spirits or animal spirits or these sub spirits in the jungles." And what was so interesting to me was his portrayal of animism. Because if you ever saw Disney's Pocahontas, it's a great expose comparing an animistic Native American culture with like a European sort of materialistic culture. And so the Indians are portrayed as living in beautiful peace and harmony with all the plants and animals. And we have old Grandma Willow Tree giving advice, and the rainstorm and the otters are my sisters and my brothers and all of this stuff, right? And here you have these white Europeans from England that just see animals as skins, forest as board feet of lumbers, and rivers as places they can dam up for energy and power. They're not seeing the rivers and the animals and the trees as living beings. And so in Pocahontas, you get a very romantic view of animism. But my missionary friend says it is not romantic at all, Blackburn. It's quite terrifying. And because there's so many spirits, and actually a dead enemy in this case is more dangerous than a living enemy, because a living enemy has to attack you physically. But a dead enemy, his spirit can attack you in your dreams, through your food, through your weapons, all sorts of ways. And so in that animistic culture, there is so much fear of the dead, of spirits, that a lot of time is spent in supplications trying to ward these things off. And so when they brought the message of the gospel, and that there is a high spirit over all these other spirits, that was just like the best news these people had ever heard. And they wanted to know more about that gospel message. And I'm going to end this first part here, and we're going to pick up, I think, with Spirit of the Rainforest, which is a book we have in our library, talking about the journey of a shaman, and how he went from, his nickname was Child Killer, because he would send his spirits out to kill the children of his rivals, to becoming filled with the Holy Spirit and the effect that had on his life. And so we'll pick up there on Wednesday.